Well, good morning, everybody. As we start off this Friday here, I wanted to show you the last 72 hours of total snowfall that accumulated from the most recent of these big systems that's moved across the central United States. And what we're going to be seeing in this upcoming forecast is a lot of change in a map like this, because next week, mid to late next week, there's a much deeper trough digging into the west. So that's going to add a lot of snowfall to the Cascades, the northern Rockies, the Blue Mountains, getting down here, even into the central Rockies. The latest models did trend a little drier or a little less on the snowpack in the Sierra Nevada, but we could watch that really shift around a lot in the coming days. But there will be a swath probably right in through this particular area that sees a lot of additional snowpack coming in from this next system next week. So again, what I drew over was the snow that came out, and again, the models did a very good job at predicting where this was going to be. Now, when we look at total precipitation, we can also see, let's kind of zoom that out a bit, where all the very heavy rainfall was, including over 90 reports of severe weather from parts of the Mid-South into the Tennessee and Ohio Valley, and then down into Mississippi, where we did have 3 tornadoes being reported. But some of these storms just in the last 3 days put down 3 to 6 inches of rainfall. And this, again, is an area that we're going to be monitoring over the next several weeks as being very active with respect to precipitation. And as that gets into the month of March, we're talking about early spring fieldwork and planting delays in this particular region. But as we go forward, this weekend is relatively quiet. Starting us off here at 8 o'clock Central Time, 9 a.m. Eastern Time, we are watching that front, which again has been weakened, move over the Mid-Atlantic through New England, where there is some ice accumulating here deep in the interior of New England, and snow in Quebec and Ontario. There's also some snow still coming off the Great Lakes on the backside of this, and a few little convective snow bursts here. But this front's going to quickly move through Virginia, the Carolinas, and through the southeast throughout the day today. Could be some light snow accumulation here on this side of the Appalachian Mountains. But once we get into Friday, about the only thing we're watching this weekend, a little clipper moves through parts of Ontario. We see snow pushing up against the northern Rockies here on the nose of some cold air that's coming in. We'll show you that in a few seconds. And that's about it. There's not a whole lot going on. There's a little clipper that comes out of Saskatchewan into Manitoba and eventually in Ontario. But this is kind of our quieter weekend. So in today's report, given that we got a bit of a quieter weekend, I kind of rehashed some of the things we discussed in last night's in-depth report, like the fact that right now we're down to 57% land area covered in some form of drought. It definitely stays anchored in the Central Plains with the latest update, but that's down from 86%. So we've almost seen a 30% improvement in our drought picture this winter. In last night's in-depth video, though, I cover what it would take to remove this drought by spring. So if you'd like to know what those weather patterns have to look like and what the chances of that occurring are, please watch that. I also included in today's report some of the year-to-date stats. I like to show these a lot, but it just kind of gives us an idea on who's been receiving a lot of this precipitation and who has not. And when you compare this to the upcoming forecast, I think it adds some context. There will be some changes to this map. This is the year-to-date temperature anomalies. And with the much colder air advancing through the northern plains into the northwest, a lot of these stats are going to start to really fall off here because it's been quite mild, especially through the Great Lakes and east. But over the southern United States, this is an area that will remain kind of under the stronghold of a pretty large subtropical ridge. And so to kind of show you how early spring has been down here, I included one of my favorite links to the U.S. National Phenology Network. It's a great one to monitor during spring. And what it shows you here is what they call the spring leaf index anomaly. And again, this is the newest data from February 16th, suggesting that there's places down here in the south and southeast, getting up toward the mid-Atlantic, that are 15 to 20 days early when you compare that spring leaf index to the arrival of spring. So just a good metric to kind of look at here. I also cover again what's going on with La Nina, how quick it's fading. We do the multi-model analysis in the report, but I would just like to show you that in the last few weeks we've seen a warming trend in Nina region 3.4, and we've maintained very warm ocean temperatures here. So it's come up 2.5 degrees Celsius since November. And so this again just kind of promotes this idea that INSO-neutral conditions will likely be the mainstay of spring and summer. And we talk again about how quickly we could transition to El Nino in the report today. Lastly, I did include the latest seasonal update from NOAA again. And remember, NOAA is usually the last to release this. They take time to evaluate all the other models. It's a smart move. And they put together kind of this handcrafted forecast. And it's important just to see what they're looking at for March, April, and May. We kind of walk through some of the potential issues with this, especially the tighter windows in the eastern Corn Belt, Great Lakes, and New England for the start of the season. But then after that, I do want to stress one thing. Even though NOAA's new drought outlook suggests improvement in the northern plains, parts of the central plains, the Pacific Northwest, and parts of California, because of the lack of a strong subtropical branch of the jet stream over the Pacific, drought continuing to show up in the southern plains is likely. Even though I expect an active severe weather season, those severe storms often don't eliminate the bigger drought risk. They come through, do a bunch of damage, deliver heavy precip, but it's localized. And then Florida. Florida's another area I'm worried about continuing to develop drought, just like the National Weather Service here, because of the presence of that subtropical ridge. It's been quite mild there. Okay, so that's all a bit of recap. Where we're going is best seen right here. The quiet weekend is because of this high over low flow in the Gulf of Alaska and off the west coast. So there's no major troughs sweeping through the United States, but that's going to change pretty quickly into next week. So what we see by next Tuesday into Wednesday, a very deep trough develops over the west, and it's got a tilt on it that's going to eject a system late next week out into the plains. It's going to have to run over. There's that dominant southeast ridge setting us up for a very active next week. Even as we go into the end of February, what do we continue to see? Broad troughing across much of North America while the southeastern ridge stays in place. So the setup here is a lot of systems that are going to do this. We could even get some better onshore flow into California into week 2. So let's go have a look at it. Starting us off today is our, with the models here, is the GFS on the left, European on the right. And we play through the first system leaving, and then the weak clippers that roll across the Canadian prairie into Sunday. That's it. Things are pretty benign for most of us this weekend. What we then see is going into Monday and Tuesday, another clipper goes through the upper Mississippi Basin, and this is the beginning of the cold air advancing through the northern plains, pushing up against the Rockies. And a system times itself to run right along that cold edge of that air into the Pacific Northwest. There could be some scattered showers over the Mid-South. You can see it in both models here. But just take a look at the size of this system diving into the Rocky Mountains, into the Cascades. It's going to put down quite a bit of snow, possibly some places 1 to 2 feet in the mountains of the Rockies and the Cascades. But then this system will emerge likely next Wednesday into Thursday, and there's a couple things I'm concerned about. It's in both models. It's in the ensembles that this is likely going to happen. There will be heavier snows to the north. You can see it in both models. The placement is not yet known. And there also will likely be some ice in this. You can see where it is in the GFS and where it is in the European. And that moves on through next Thursday toward New England. Now, how much snow New England gets out of this, I'll be honest, is still a bit of a mystery. I have to see how high the pressure is to the north of it and how far to the south that snow band makes it. We're just going to have to wait till next week. Now, as this all happens, we continue to see deeper troughs in the west. So we're going to continue to kind of add some snow to the west. But if you just said, let's look at the probability of getting at least 6 inches of snow in the next 10 days, we can now see as that trough dives what it does to the west. And then this will be that corridor over which we expect to see the heaviest snow. So Montana, North South Dakota, northern Nebraska, Minnesota, northern Iowa, Wisconsin, Michigan, and then into New England. This also cuts right through Ontario and Quebec as well. If we look at just the west, I want to make sure you see one point. The newest European model did back off on the snow in the Sierra Nevada, but I bet it will fluctuate a lot this weekend. But what I like about it, don't look at the amounts, just look at the fact that the deep trough there will be adding to our winter snowpack. And this is exactly what I want to see this time of year. On the ice side of it, this is where the Europeans putting down the greatest risk of ice with that system late next week. We're going to watch this evolve. Even though this is an operational forecast, we look at this more for guidance rather than to say, oh, it's going to be exactly right here. It's just the point that there's the risk of ice with this next system. On the week 2 timescale, models did trend wetter for the whole West Coast going into week 2 and keep the Ohio Valley, Tennessee Valley, Eastern Corn Belt wet, both scenarios. So this seems to be the pattern we're setting up. A broad trough coming in, extending across the country. The fastest winds will run between the southeast ridge where it's warm and the cold air to the north, and that's what's going to set up a very active pattern to finish February and to start March. Now, from here, take a look at these temperatures. So Friday's a cooler one because we're behind the storm system that went through. But then what we're going to see is the warmer air exits east, and the cooler air fades in the middle part of the country as we go into this weekend. What will be changing significantly once we get into this weekend is what happens on Monday. We're going to start to see the beginning of this Arctic outbreak pushing through the northern plains out of the Canadian prairie. And there it is on Tuesday and Wednesday. So very mild south, but high temperatures. These are max temperatures, struggle to get out of the single digits for Montana, the Dakotas, all the way through Wyoming, even into parts of northern Nebraska. And that colder air tries to continue its southward advancement. But remember, it's actually setting up the big system, remember, that's going to come out like this and run between these two major temperature centers, or if you want to, whatever you want to call them. And it's going to be that track that's going to be most critical in determining who gets the ice, how much snow's on the northern side, and how much rain and severe storms we have to the south. If we look out there longer term, this is what the temperature pattern is doing going forward. We're out here to the end of February now, the last 5 days of February, and the first few days of March. And it's a repeat of the pattern we've been talking about for a while now. One last thing to show you, I meant to bring this up, is in the report I did an analysis on what's going on in South America, included all the NDVI imagery, so I want you to take a close look at that. But there's a couple things I'd like to point out about what's going on right now in South America. So let's first of all look at the next 15 days of precipitation anomalies. Very wet in central Brazil. They're trying to harvest in Mato Grosso, continue the harvest. We'll get new updates on that later today. But this is very, very wet. In the NDVI analysis for this region, including like Mato Grosso do Sul, Goiás, Minas Gerais, Sao Paulo, Parna, it's the highest in the last 20 years. I also do the same analysis for Argentina. Argentina overall is a little drier than normal over the next 15 days. But many people have asked me in the last 24 hours if there's going to be a major frost event happening in Argentina. And there is no indication of that right now. No early frost. It could get into the 40s in Fahrenheit in terms of temperatures here. So that's single digits in Celsius. But I do not see a frost event happening in Argentina at this point. So I wanted to take that off the table, but make sure I shared that with you. All right, we'll wrap it up here. Have a good weekend. We'll talk next week.